All right, we're looking in Colossians chapter 3, verse 20. Just a little bit of background. Remember what we covered last week. That what we noted was verse 17 is actually very important in multiple ways. And that is that it kind of connects this section in a different way. If you go back to Colossians 2, verses 6 and 7, where the thesis of the book is laid out, as you have therefore received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk ye in him, rooted and built up and established in the faith, as you've been taught, abounding therein with thanksgiving. He essentially brought there and said, okay, we've established who Jesus is, now listen to him. And with that, then the rest of the chapter, in chapter 2, was designed to show how things about Christ and from Christ were being ignored around them, and they didn't need to fall for that. But then in the beginning of chapter 3, he then says, okay, having established that, what direction are you going now? And so we ought to be going to be with Christ in heaven. And that's the direction begin. If you then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your affections on things above and not on things of the earth. He then established through what follows is the kind of changes in your mindset you need to make in order to accomplish that. The things you need to get out of your life and completely, the things that you need to take care of, the next step and growth in yourself internally. And then as you develop in relationship with others, that with your brethren, that you work together to find this greater unity that God wants for people within the body of Christ, that is then ultimately reaches that pinnacle of where now then we working together with all this, meet God together and worship together, where we are truly all one because we are right with him and right with one another. And that's when everything comes together. So in verse 17, he picked that up. Submit yourselves to your own husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. What is he saying? The right kind of attitude of Christianity in its heart is designed for all of life, not just for some little carve out you have for your spirituality. And that's where it comes up and says, okay, what's the next closest when we go out there? It's marriage. And that's where he's going with this. He's next going to, now that brings us then to verse 20, and we'll read 20 and 21 together, where he writes, children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. Now, just like what we have with anything else, there's a context for all of this. First of all, when he says children, now, he's working through family relationships, so wives, husbands, now children. That is, God has a design for what makes a home a strong, healthy, happy home. And when everyone is perfect, providing and doing these things, that's when things really can be a great environment. And again, we talked last week about it's not that you've got your perfect situations all the time in that home. That's why we need these things. Okay? And that is, you're trying to keep there from being conflict, and instead, you're creating an environment where the other is always served. Both of what you find with husbands and wives is that in submission, there's an idea of serving and giving to the other of the husband. Husbands, love your wives. What's he talking about? You need to prioritize and making the other important. Now, what he has created then is, while there is a distinction in the way that works, because ultimately you have to have order in the home, and if I'll say, it is designed to create this reciprocal otherness. That sounds, I don't know, sociology on me. I apologize for that. But it's designed where love and submission are working in such a way so that each is making sure the other is recognized, respected, cared about, and is recognized by me so that we can deal with these things. Well, now you bring that into, okay, what the next step is, which in the parent-child relationship. It's a different relationship. but we have reciprocal responsibilities. He starts with children. It's interesting that he starts each time with the one who has to listen, who's in that position of, okay, wives submit, children obey. It's important he doesn't leave it there. But children obey. Now that is actually the word which is put yourself under what you hear. Okay? Here's what mom and dad say. That's a child's role. Okay? Now, there are a lot of practical reasons for that. It's always one of my favorite things. I'm not going to name names, but one of my favorite things is when I get a student who is like 19, and they'll say something like this. Well, in my experience, and I'm like, you don't have any experience. What are you talking about? Okay, well, experience as a child. Okay, is that the nature of how this works is you're never going to have the same experience as your parents. Can't work. You can have different experiences, but they're going to always catch you on the number of years. I'm just telling you, right? So there's value, and that's what he's trying to point out here. Is that? But it's also a role. Is that household has to operate, and you need to understand. No, there's going to be exception when he says, "Obey your parents in all things." Now, this is why I think sometimes we get in trouble because we fail to consider contextually the Bible as a whole. Well, does that mean I'm to obey them when they want me to sin? No, that's the exception. Okay, Acts 5 verse 29, we ought to obey God rather than men. But by doing this, I want you to think about why it's so important in terms of mindset, and why children can have issues with this. And what is the real issue, and why does this matter so much for the home, of what God is doing in the home? I know it's a kind of vague question. I'm trying not to give away where I'm going. Say it again. It's okay, good. Well, see, she's right there. She knows what I'm thinking. She said, hey, you behave yourself. Okay. She said, I was getting there. I'm going to refer you to verse 18. No, never mind. You're not my wife, so you don't have to listen. It's a matter of will. The home is the primary training ground for the human will. I want you to think about everything that's being said in these 4 verses. Wives, submit. What does that take? You have to have great control over your will to submit. Husbands, love. Guess what? You have to have a strong power over your will to focus then that in the right way to do what love demands. Children, obey. What is it? Teaching them to control their will. You don't just do stuff because you want to. You have to have control. And guess what? Looking ahead to the next one, fathers, do not provoke your children. Oh, what is he talking about? Fathers, parents, you have to have control and exercise control over your will. The home is the primary place where God put in effect from the very beginning, which is, remember, the first institution he created in Genesis 2. As a design to teach us spiritual lessons by relationships. And when we put all this together now, you're not being simply tested. Oh, submit, love, obey, don't provoke. The question is have you given your will over to God or not? Because that's in display in your home. Okay, now that's the background meta understanding, if you will, of what's going on here. So, children obey. Why? Because you need to learn to control yourself. You need to know how to make right decisions. It doesn't, y'all realize how much, really, now think about this, how much knowledge and ability and wisdom do you have to do to make a decision? That takes nothing whatsoever to make a decision. Making the proper decisions, that's another matter, right? That's the tough spot. And so, it's like when people try to get out of it and say, you're dealing with your children, and they said, well, now how did this happen? And you get the old class, I don't know. You're the only one here. It didn't jump off the shelf and break. Okay? So you're teaching in that way, right? What is it? It's about the control of the exercise of the will, right? Now, because we are all different, children are different too, right? If you've had more than one child, the chances of them being alike in this are really small, right? They tend to have their own issues of how they approach things, okay? And each one's a different kind of challenge. There's nothing you have to be more creative about than parenting. This requires all sorts of creativity. Okay, well, children, obey your parents in all things. It's within a spiritual context. Okay, the context of the book is set. He's talking to them, but notice, he's talking to children, number one, who are old enough to be capable. He's not just talking about young kids here, though that would be included. He's talking about those who are old enough, because they're getting a spiritual instruction from an apostle, to be Christians and know the difference. And yes, as you are at that age, that's where you especially need to appreciate that the first line of defense, if you will, of really bad decisions in life is your parents. That's the first line of after you, it's your parents helping you and saying, Okay, that's the line of defense. And that's why God set this up, so that you can avoid, as young as a child, really regrettable decisions later on, because parents are there to help you avoid those. As many as possible. You think you're going to get away with no regrettable decisions, forget about that. So, obey your parents in all things. But notice the reason why. For this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Now, why do I want to emphasize this? It is important for children to understand. Now, he's talking to those who are Christians primarily. Being able to help children understand what it is to train their will to want to please the Lord, and that be how they go about things, is really important. As early on as possible. That we're going this direction and we're saying, hey, wait a minute, right? Who are we going to try to please? It's not because I am somebody. It's because I want you to please the Lord too. And by teaching that as the ground of this, it is not like we as parents are putting ourselves on a level of saying, I've got it all figured out. Instead, it is about, I'm trying to direct you as best I can to make sure you please the Lord. And when we put that together and we can get the motive for the children on track of they want to please the Lord, but that doesn't mean they know how, because they don't have the experience. Now, then you come back and as adults you can say, okay, wait a minute. Now remember, in the case of the Colossians, how many of them had grown up in a Christian home? Think about it practically here. 0. 0. This is a fairly young congregation. And so they are working through all these things and trying to essentially establish a Christian context for their home. And that's what he's doing here. You want to please God. You want to please the Lord. Jesus, he died for you. All we go through this, verse He just finished talking about it in verse 17. Please the Lord. And that's what your parents are there to help you do, which now he moves on the responsibility then of the parents on the other end. Beginning with fathers. This does not mean that, sorry, oh, mothers, you can just, whatever. Why? There's a leadership aspect to this about fathers and setting the standard, setting the kind of boundaries, taking the leadership, okay? But this is interesting because who's actually with the children more over their lifetime? Mothers, isn't it? Okay, so the nature of what he is setting up then specifically is not that only the fathers are the disciplinarians of the group. No, it's just a reflection of who should be leading. Now, this, you think, okay, well, where's the balance then? That they need to be on the same page. You know how you get on the same page? You do what verses 18 and 19 say. And you have that interchange, and you make sure you're together on this so that there's a united front always on what you're doing with the children, so that then there's unity and there's understanding of what's going forward, so that they know exactly what they're to obey, and they can never run the two of you against one another. Lead. But then the question is, do not provoke your children. It says, lest they become discouraged. Now the question though is, what is provoking your children involved? Because I say this because you can look at, if you play it based upon the reactions of the children are kind of provoked anytime they're told no, aren't they? Right? Any honesty among the children here? No. You know, that's the natural thing, is we're going to have this. I don't get my way. What did I say this is all about? Learning to put the will in the right perspective. Okay. So if that's the case, if I'm correct about the nature of all this, that gives us a context to understand when he says, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. The word there is basically... It's interesting in a way because it's like the idea of watching just sap their will entirely, if you will. I think that this is the contrast. The idea of discouragement in this way is not, oh, they feel down because they were told no. It's because you've essentially sapped their will so they don't have any will left. Stephanie, I think I saw your hand. Yeah. Yes, that's a good way to put it. I like the contrast you're creating there. Is you're not trying to break your child like that's some kind of wild stallion out there. You're wanting to harness the energy, right? Harness the energy and make sure it's directed the proper way, right? You don't want to end up with a broken child if you can help it. I mean, we got plenty of things in the world that'll break a child on its own. So what are you trying to do? You're trying to make sure that in this process of the fact that they're obeying, that you don't take that for granted and you don't take it as, the ogre master role, but rather as a responsibility to make sure that as you're working on them, that you never get to the point of where they give up on themselves. To have them point toward God does not require giving up on self. It means giving over to God. Right? I know my language is kind of, I hope it's not too confusing, but I'm dealing with a very subtle point about how we need to view the home and what this responsibility is. We don't get just a lot of information on these kind of principles in the home, now do we? We get as many practical things from Proverbs as you get really the New Testament, which is principle, but that's how the New Testament works. Why? Because he wants the fathers to have the right mindset. Just as he wants the children to have the right mindset of look, you do what you're told. Do what you're told because you want to seek God. You want to seek the Lord. You want to please the Lord. Motivation. Notice, do the right thing. Why? Because you've got correct motivation to do it. He's put it together. And this is what he wants to make sure that fathers understand and don't end up breaking that. It's a handoff, right? Parenting is about trying your best to hand your children over to the Lord when they leave home. That's what you're trying to do. And anyone who thinks that's easy is kidding themselves. Heather. Yes, yeah. That's where, again, the right relationship and having, and this is all the practical part of it, is trying to figure out how to know what's going on in a child's mind. Now, you have to know you're trying to figure out what's going on in your own children's mind. That's tough enough. You're not going to get everybody's. Okay, what is going on in there? Okay, well, you're not often going to know. And you have to ask, and I'd say you have to get good at reading early signs. Who are they around? When they have choices, and it's one of the important points I'd say on fathers do not provoke your children. You got to make sure they have choices and opportunities to make choices so they can train themselves. So that, yes, there can be correction necessary, but you want them to exercise that skill of making moral choices and thinking about things through in a spiritual way. You want to do that, okay? Because you don't want them to not have that and then get out and have to deal with the world. Sandra?
Your goal is to raise your children so that when they get married, when they have their family, you're looking at a blueprint from God, what they learn, and each child is different, but you have a blueprint.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing is, it's one of those things, about parenting, is you never know exactly how you're doing until it's too late to correct it. Yeah, that's right. You pray a lot. Okay. You just don't. That's why he's giving us this. Okay. So that's why I want to just go through it. But if you can take away from this, not only the individual role each time, and now just for context here, since Caleb was able to open up this morning about his lack of cleanliness at times, okay, you are looking at, when, does anyone remember the old, I've got to go back a ways, y'all remember the James Dobson book on the self-willed child, or what was it called, the strong-willed child? That strong-willed child. You'd think I'd know that because my mom thought he had me in mind when he wrote that. Okay? What is it about? Training that will over, not to no longer be strong, but to want to be right for God. Okay? That's in parenting. That's what we should want as children. And then, because you've got to have that kind of control, then to exercise yourself as a husband or a wife. And the maturity of dealing with it. What do we have a lot of in the relationship breakdown that's going in society? It's not surprising to me when you have a breakdown of appreciation for God's will, for His word and training, that you have all sorts of issues in family because they're not bringing the concept of and letting the home do the work. And instead, it becomes a battleground instead of a training ground. And that's what you definitely do not want. Okay, so let's now look, slight transition, but he's still building on what he did in verse 17 of saying, okay, we're moving outside now to other aspects and roles that you have. Beyond your relationship as a Christian to God and your relationship as a brother or sister in Christ to your fellow Christians. So that's when he goes, your relationships in the home. Well, now we're going to move outside the home to the workplace, but of course we're dealing with the first century workplace in many places that offer the extremes, which is very important. The extremes in existence at this time give us some context for which we ought to respond with a lot of thanks. Verse 22, bondservants, slaves, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. I want you to try to imagine being a slave in the first century. In Colossae, someone taught you the gospel. Number one, that should have been a thrilling feeling because you matter. Now, the slavery in ancient Rome, a different kind of experience than slavery in American 19th century. Those are different experiences. It was slavery in ancient Rome was based more upon conquered people rather than a racial distinction, right? So you never look at it. That was one of the things that differ, and it obviously has had repercussions in America. But what you had there, it's still basically the whole nature of a slave is you have no will that matters. Isn't that really the core idea? Is that what you think and what you want is immaterial? That's the core aspect of what a slave is, which is why it's dehumanizing. But there were those people who are Christians in this situation. What do? You obey in all things. Same word is given to the children. Why? Because your will in this is immaterial. Obey in all things your masters, that's lords, according to the flesh. Now that's important as a sidelight because he's already implying something. You have another Lord. And so he's already bringing that up. Go ahead and do your work. When they tell you to do stuff, that's your role. You do that work. But now he's going to say, well, that's the first thing. Now he's going to tell you, and this is what I want us to think of, how to do it. So in this, the modern equivalent is being an employee. But let's make sure we establish the differences, okay? You couldn't quit being a slave. You can quit your job. Now you still probably ought to find another one first, but you can quit your job. You can't quit being a slave. They didn't have that option. And he's still telling them this. Now, I want you to remember, there's something else of interest here. Does anyone remember that when he's going to Colossae, who else was at Colossae? Philemon. And he's sending the epistle to Philemon that we have in the Bible at the same time that he's saying this. That book, if you don't know, is about Paul basically telling Philemon, I'm sending Onesimus back. Onesimus had been Philemon's slave. He ran away and met Paul, became a Christian. Paul sends, you're going to go back. Onesimus is going back to his former master, who's also a Christian. And Paul says, here I am, sending him back. He's coming back to you. Here's what's happened in the meantime. And without saying, free him, I could tell you to do that. I'm not going to. Because I have confidence in you that you'll essentially, I'm going to paraphrase, do the right and loving thing and so much more. Why? So now he's not going to free him by obligation. He's going to have to free him because of love. Which is so much better for Philemon, by the way. So much better. Because now How does that look to Onesimus now? Okay. So that's a little bit of side, not a background, it's side ground going on. How are you to behave at work? Are you always happy in your job? I'm going to try to find the person who's always happy in their job. Okay. I've found people who were entrepreneurs that they owned the business and they ran the business and they still hated the owner. Sometimes I just can't live with him. So what you're looking at in this is you're saying, wait a minute. There are going to be difficult times, problems with people, with things you're given to do. I remember in a job I had when I was in college as retail sales, right? You have to go through some of these series of things. You got to work at retail at some point. And it was for, everyone remember this? Payless shoes? Okay. If y'all ever do this, they had more regulations of what you were supposed to do as an employee far beyond sell shoes. It was amazing, like what you were supposed, all this long list, and basically it was designed to make sure that you never took a break. That's the only, there was no rhyme or reason other than if you're going to work, we're going to pay you, we're going to get you doing something no matter how dumb. Okay, you ever felt like that, people? Okay. How do you deal with those situations? You obey. How? You do what you're told. But it matters how. Not with eye service. Now what is eye service? Okay, all right. Eye service is that person that they're only busy when the boss is around. They're the most creative people, and they got the best time in the world of knowing what to do. So all this energy, you've been working, the whole hour, and all of a sudden, boss comes in, and this person is over here doing all this and looking super, oh, well, you've really done a good job here. You're like, okay, don't be that person. You do the job. Don't be worried about your boss. You're just responding according to what you're supposed to do. Respond. Don't do it as men pleasers, okay? That's related to this, is this idea of, but the focus as he's about to go through is, well, who else would I be pleasing? Are we just trying to make sure that everyone's happy, or are we trying to actually, he's raising the bar of how we should work. The expectations of your boss versus the expectation of God. Now, sometimes you don't know any better, right? Sometimes this works in your favor. Okay, I'm going to explain. My very first job, I was hired. One of the members of the church, the congregation where I was, he was a mechanic, and he wanted someone who could come in and could sweep the floors and clean on 2 days a week. Wednesday, so he could be able to get out earlier to go to Bible study, and Friday so he could get away for the weekend. So it's two days a week. Go in, sweep. Now this is, you have to go through, and you got the oil, you're cleaning up all the oil that's on there, you're using all the things to do that. And then I'd had to, clean water fountains and all those kind of things. So it was just a cleaning job, okay? First time so I'm just going to clean, right? How my mom would want me to clean, so I'm just cleaning along. He comes in after he sent me to work on the sink that was apparently supposed to be white. I found that out later. And how did I find that out? Because I cleaned it. Okay? Looked like Caleb had been doing dishes in it. Okay, so y'all make sure he hears this, okay? So I cleaned that thing up. He came over and looked at it and says, I could eat off that. He was surprised. I didn't worry about what his expectations, I was just clinging to the expectations that I'd been taught to have. Okay? And that is, if we only are trying to do the lowest expectations all the time rather than seeking to do what God would want me to do, it's a different thing. Now, sometimes you'll do it the way that God wants you to do it, and your boss is upset because they want you doing something underhanded. All right? Nope, can't do that. But notice the next part, but in sincerity of heart. Now, that particular word is pretty interesting. Simplicity is, I believe, the King James, and that's actually a pretty good rendering, because it basically is the idea of a focus in your heart, meaning what you care about. What matters to you in this process? I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Fearing God. So the whole focus is, I'm not of two ways about everything. My heart is already determined that I'm here to do the best job I can. Why? Because of my respect for God. You can have a boss you really don't respect, right? Everybody's going to have one of those at some point if you work in a lot of places. Okay, you don't have to respect your boss to do the best job as long as you are working because you respect God. And he's just in one verse. He's still got more to say on this subject. But look at how much he has put in here about you just do the absolute best you can. This person, the work ethic follows, because the standards are up there. It's just a matter of learning the job and doing it the right way. Because are you worried about when the boss is going to drop in? No, because you're always trying to work hard. Always trying to do the best you can. Let them evaluate. Why? Because God's evaluating you all the time anyway. He knows what you're working on. He knows how hard you've been doing. God knows when your friend over there who just decided to work in the last 5 minutes because he heard the boss's voice, and he's going to works hard, it looks like he's doing all the work. God knows better. So you might fool the boss. But you're not fooling God about that, are you? So it's about putting that kind of effort in, which is why the next verse, he says, verse 23, whatever you do, does that sound familiar? Verse 17, whatever you do in word or deed. And whatever you do, do it heartily. Now that means work out of your soul. The idea of in this way with soul is about what animates you. Okay? It's kind of the connection, if you will, between the spirit and the body that now we jump to life. What animates you? Whatever you do, give it a rigor that's rooted in your own heart. That's what I'm doing. This is work this way. The word work, it's where we get our word ergonomics from, but it's be active. Now, understand what that means now. Be active in what way? Well, whatever the job requires. Now, why do I say it that way? Because people will come in, this is for years as a preacher, and you're sitting there at a desk reading or writing something down, or you're sitting at a computer, and for some people, they look in and they cannot see that as working. I assure you it is. You're just messing around on the computer. They do that at home. So it's a different mindset. You know, you're active in what you are to do. You're producing things, right? So you're doing it heartily. Whatever you do, do it heartily. Okay, work out of your soul. And here he's going to bring it back as to the Lord. So he already said fearing God. Now he's added here as to the Lord. Now go back and look at the times before when he's talking about to the Lord. He's taking these wording that he has had earlier, and he's using it to apply to this kind of activity. Why? Because he wants you to understand that God takes all of these principles, and the expectation is this still applies. This applies when you leave here. This applies when you're at home. And now he says this applies when you're at work. Whatever you do. So whatever is required for you to do in that job, you do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men. Don't be that person. You've got someone that it matters to. Have you ever been in a situation where you were told to do something by the bosses, and so you worked really hard to do it, finished, and afterward it was like they'd forgotten they told you to do it? You never heard about it again? Okay? The Lord still saw it. Am I the only one these things happen to? Okay. So anyway, that's what I want you to see going on. That why? Does this take that will? Because it takes the willingness to see beyond the boss to the Lord. And that's the framework for what I'm doing while I'm here. And whatever they are, they're just in between. Whatever I'm given to do, I'm trying to please the Lord, and I'm going to do everything I can to do him just as I would anything else. And that in example is so valuable of what people see around you when you leave, because they're going to wonder why. And Paul just gave you the best answer you could ever ask for. Why do you do this? Because I have a better boss. His name is Jesus Christ. All right, we will pick up there next week.